Hi, welcome to part one of a travel video. Hi, welcome to Garage Geek. I realized that this video is going to be kind of self-indulgent. I was thinking about it, and not many people make travel videos. And I know people mention their travels and they'll put pictures of their travels. So for example, Embryonic Robot right now is in Italy, and he's mostly showing record shops that he's been in, and then he has a slideshow of pictures. I did this last year, and I'm doing it again this year. So this is my travels, and this is what I did along the way. But you know what? It's a good record for me. So in a year, I can watch this video and remember my trip. And just for that alone, I think it's worth it for me to make it. If I lose a bunch of subs over this, hey, I'm not in this for the subs. I'm from Los Angeles. So I flew across the country, and my friend helped me get a cheaper ticket. And I was very hesitant because it had a layover, but it was much cheaper. So it was an hour and a half layover, which really does extend travel time. But I said, you know what? It's worth it to save some money. So ends up that, so I thought an hour and a half layover. I didn't bring any food. I will have plenty of time to eat in the airport before I get on my next flight. And because of the time difference, I was arriving pretty late at night, even though I was leaving in the morning on the West Coast. Of course, the plane was delayed. I get to my layover stop, and they are announcing, we are going to close the doors. You need to get on the plane. Because there were two of us on the plane that was late, and we had to book it over from one gate to the next. And luckily, it was just two gates down, so it wasn't very far. But of course, didn't have time to eat. So I was just now I remember why I do not like layovers. I always recommend, if you can get a straight shot, what do you call that? A nonstop to where you're going, it's actually really worth it. So I got to Boston, and then the next morning, my friend Bob picked me up, because actually his nephew did, and we stayed at his nephew's house the first night. We got up early, and we went in, we were going toward Boston. We were going to park at a train station and then take the train in, which is what we did. But on the way, we saw that there was another National Historic Site called Minuteman, and we decided to stop there, and that was about a 2-hour detour. That's going to be very important later. I was very worried about the weather, because when we got there, it was really hot, and I think they were having a heat wave. So we go to Minuteman. It was a very beautiful park. Here's the brochure for Minuteman National Historic Park. And the thing about this is that it's one of those kind of long, thin parks where you can actually hike it and hike the trail of, so that's what it looks like, right? It's that long, thin strip. And you could actually hike along this, and it was where important battles took place in the Revolutionary War, ending up at, I think, Bunker Hill. And that's going to be important later. I'm going to talk about Bunker Hill. So here's the other side of the brochure. The first thing that we saw, we drove by it because we wanted to go to the visitor center first. But we saw where the midnight ride of Paul Revere ended.
Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere.
Listen, my children, and you shall hear.
And as we were driving by, there was a ring of soldiers around it, and they were paying homage to Paul Revere and other members of the Midnight Ride. So not only did we visit, one of the important spots was the ending of the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere, but we saw the bridge where a battle took place, and this famous Minuteman statue. And I bought a coaster. One really interesting place along this route was there was a tavern, and I really enjoyed the tavern sign and the building. And I just would imagine people on their midnight rides stopping at this tavern, or maybe even changing horses there. So after this, we did park and then take the train into Boston. So here's the brochure for the Boston Freedom Trail. So we started our trip at the Boston Common because the subway or the train line has a stop right there. So I just want to give a little bit of background on Boston. I went across the country a couple of times in my car, and the last time I went, I believe, I had been across the entire country, and I stopped at Boston, and it was pouring rain. And at that point, I was just very tired in my trip. I was frustrated because there was nowhere to park. It was pouring rain. I stopped at the Boston Common. I saw an Edgar Allan Poe statue, and then I got in my car and I left. So this time I was very happy because I was flying in. It would be the very beginning of my trip, but Boston was going to get me again because there was a heat wave. I wanted to get there early because I knew it was going to be hot, but we stopped at Minuteman and that took about 2 hours. And so we were getting there around noon, which is the worst part of the day. And my friend Bob, he's 20 years older than I am, and he has mobility issues. In fact, he has a handicapped placard in his car. I'm going to talk about that more. And so I knew that we would be restricted in how we were walking, but he started walking through the park and we were going uphill toward the Shaw Memorial, which is so cool. That memorial is awesome. If you don't know about Robert Shaw, I think his first name is Robert. Well, I learned about him from watching the movie Glory. I get a lot of my history from movies. It was really cool to see that memorial. But at that point, my friend had already, it was too much. Just walking through the park, walking uphill with the heat. I told him, look, I want to at least try to do some of this. So I sent him back to the car. I said he could go back to his nephews or whatever and pick me up later. But I just knew he couldn't handle the heat. So I continued, and that was a huge mistake. So I started touring around Boston. I went to a graveyard. It was right around the corner from the park. I started walking there. I walked through the graveyard. There were a bunch of famous graves in that graveyard. It was Samuel Adams, I believe Benjamin Franklin, and saw also John Hancock. There were probably more, but like I said, the heat was so stifling that I didn't spend the time that I should have in that graveyard. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. So I was walking around. I was following the Freedom Trail. My phone was getting overheated. The battery was going so fast because of the heat. I was worried that I would not have any power, and I needed to contact Bob when I was done so that we could hook up and go home. So I couldn't let my phone die. So I was walking around and I went to a couple more places. I seriously saw a lot of really cool things. There was a outdoor Holocaust memorial that was really cool. It was like a walkway with glass that you walked through, and on the glass they had all the numbers, and as you walked through, steam was coming up, and I thought that was probably symbolic. I went to 2 more buildings along the way. One of them was Faneuil Hall, and here's some of my some more magnets I bought. So I think the problem wasn't that it was so hot. I was fine with the heat. I was walking through it. I wasn't doing as much as I should. But the problem is I kept going into buildings and they would have the AC full on. It would be like a shock to my system. I would be super hot, sweat running down. And then my body temperature would cool really fast. And then I'd go back out into the heat. And then I would go back into the AC. And I think this took a toll on me. After walking only about half of the trail that's in the downtown area, I sat down, I bought a drink and I sat down and I realized I wasn't having fun. I wasn't sitting and going through the museums and watching the videos and learning about the history. I think the heat was just too much for me and I was kind of rushing it. And I was also worried about my friend Bob and about my phone. And I just said at that point, I'd only been through, I think I got on the trail from here to here. I think I got about here, and I didn't see any of the ones up here. The final stop over here, I did go back to later, but I'll talk about that. So at that point I said, look, you're not having fun. So Boston has kicked your ass again. You just got to accept it and you got to leave. And that's what I did. But the only consolation is at least I did some of it this time instead of just seeing one statue and leaving. I was frustrated again with Boston, and we were supposed to stay there 2 nights, and we were going to go into Boston again. But I said because of the heat wave, I'm like, nope. And we left a day early. I'm like, I am so over Boston. I need to get out of here. Poor Boston. Sorry, guys. I know a lot of you are from, some of you are from Boston, and I'm not saying your city's horrible. I'm just saying I came during a heat wave and it just kicked my ass. I needed to go. So I want to go ahead and show my stamp for Boston National Historic Park. I think I earned that one. Oh, and earlier I forgot to show the stamp for Minuteman National Historic Park. So we went ahead and got an Airbnb along the route. So our next stop was going to be Cape Cod. And so we got a place that was kind of like halfway to Cape Cod, because Cape Cod is not very far from Boston. And along the way, we stopped at the New Bedford Whaling Community. Here's the brochure for that. So New Bedford Whaling Community is kind of a town that you walk through. So there are a couple museums right in the center, but you basically walk through the town and you see the effects of the whaling industry on this town, and it was a very beautiful town. Now, I do have to give you a trigger warning. There is a giant cock coming. Here is some of the tchotchkes that I bought from the New England. I collect this style, and I just loved that picture. And so I actually bought the coaster and the magnet with that picture on it. Even though you wouldn't stay a long time in New Bedford Whaling Community, it was a really nice place to just walk around and stroll. There was a lot of art on the streets. There was a church there that had an upper floor. They had a lot of pictures around, referencing famous people like Herman Melville. So that night we didn't end up going into Cape Cod National Seashore, not yet. So we decided to stay kind of local. We ended up in Hyannis Port. Now, not having planned that, I quickly did some research and I found out that that area was very important to the Kennedys. That's where they had their summer residences. I think at least one Kennedy still lives there. There is a Kennedy compound. That evening, I found a Kennedy memorial that was very pretty. It was right next to a veterans park. Whenever I can, I try to stop at the veterans memorials in the towns that I go to. And this one had a Korean veterans monument. And then the next morning, we went to the JFK Museum in Hyannis. This museum was basically a lot of photos. There's a statue outside and some fun art around it. But yeah, I ended up having fun. There was just a bunch of photos on the wall, and I took pictures with it, hamming it up. So I'm sure I'll show you some of the pictures. And then I got these 2 postcards. And from there, we went about 2 miles to the Edward Gorey house. Now, this is one of the artists on my route that I wanted to see. There was another one that no matter how I worked it, I couldn't get it in, because a lot of these museums have very specific days and hours that they're open, so they're not open every day, not even in the summer. And so the other one I wanted to see kind of on the way back was Norman Rockwell's museum, especially because my sister loves Norman Rockwell. But I couldn't work it in. I couldn't get there on a day that it was actually open. So I kind of regret that, but I was able to go to the Edward Gorey house. The Edward Gorey house just celebrates his life and work. He lived in that house for a long period and he developed his style. He's pretty famous for killing off children in his children's books, surprisingly enough. And so it was really hard for him to get his macabre sense of humor out there. The house itself was fun and whimsical. The gardens were fun. I have one magnet. I have a bunch of brochures because they have rotating things to try to get people to go. And they still have the old brochures. And so I was able to grab them. When I was there, it was the Edward Gorey movable book. And that was actually pretty neat. And then here are some of the postcards that I got. I really like that one. The cat asleep on the bed with the light coming in. Just strange. This one is actually in the garden. I'll show a picture of that. So he was gay, and I was surprised to see this from one of his works. And I think those guys are cute. There he is, Edward Gorey. I really like his cartoon style. From the Edward Gorey house, we checked into our Airbnb, which was a beautiful, beautiful house that we had a room in. And the funniest thing was the proprietress, we were talking and found it turns out that her son is living in Los Angeles and he's a brewer. And he works at the Highland Park Brewery, which is a couple blocks from my house, and I've been there often. It's just an example of how small the world can be sometimes. So that day, we actually went into Cape Cod National Seashore. We spent 2 days at the seashore, going in and out at various times. So I'm going to go ahead and show some of the art cards, So that's the way it looks, right? And up there is Provincetown. Now, I'm going to talk about Provincetown a little bit because my friend never told me that Provincetown is a huge Mecca for gay people. I had no idea. So I was like, okay, we'll go to Provincetown. And he didn't tell me. So here's the Cape Cod National Parks brochure. And as you can see, it's very long. Oops, it's like this. It's very long and thin, and you have stops along the way. And mostly what you're going to see in this park, beaches with a few lighthouses. But man, is it pretty. Lots of hikes you can do. I would like to go back actually and do some of the hikes. But we pull into Provincetown, and the first thing I see, a Jeep goes by with two drag queens all done up, their hair out like here, singing in the back of a Jeep, driving down the street. And I was like, oh my gosh, so much fun. And it just brought me back to my days living in San Francisco and being near Castro and always going to the Castro. And I was like, I wasn't expecting it because I didn't know. They have something called the afternoon tea. This was a term I'd never heard of. And I guess all the gay people come out and they go like dancing and clubbing at certain hours of the afternoon, and it's like a time when you go out and show yourself. And there was a parking guy and their parking attendant, and he was like talking to this guy, and he's like, are you gonna give me, and he was so flamboyantly gay, he's like, are you gonna give me a ticket? And he's like, I'm just here for the tea, and I can't move my car. It was like hilarious. And the guy was like, I'm sorry, sir, I'm just here doing my job. And the queen was going off on him. It was hilarious. So this is where I want to stop and talk about my friend, Bob. He has a handicapped placard. So my friend is getting older, and he fell once, and he broke his arm, his wrist. He fell another time, and he dislocated his kneecap. Like his kneecap, this is so gross. His like kneecap went up his leg. Ew. I'm like grossed out just thinking about that. But he's also older, and they gave him a temporary pass. And when he went back to the doctor was like, you know what? I'm just going to let you keep this. And so he has a handicapped placard. This was so useful on our trip because Massachusetts has handicapped people park free. And they have spaces for them. They don't put money in meters. It's very strange. And so we would pull up. Every parking spot was taken, but there'd be a handicap spot, and we would be able to pull right in. Like in P-Town, there was nowhere to park, and we would just pull in and we'd get a spot. And I was like, this is so weird for me. Like, number one, there's meters and we don't have to pay. I was like paranoid. Okay, I get it that we have a handicap parking spot, but we don't have to pay. I even went up to the attendant. I'm like, are you sure we don't have to pay? And they're like, yes, handicapped people don't pay in this state. And it's just so strange. If you can travel with a handicapped person, do it. Because, well, I mean, you won't get to do any hiking, but man, you're going to be able to park everywhere we went. We would pull right up to the front, no matter where. Every national park site, you know, the parking lots would be full. There'd be people circling. We got a spot. And I was like, okay, this is pretty cool. I felt guilty, but he actually does have mobility issues, right? And so, like, if he walks too much, he gets winded. I'm not too guilty about it, but he's not handicapped in the sense where, you know, a wheelchair or anything like that. So I kind of felt guilty taking the spot, but then again, it saved us so much time. What do you think? I mean, it benefited me so much. I still feel guilty about that, but I benefited from it. After we left P-Town, we didn't stay there too long because we were going to go back the next day. We were just kind of checking it out. We did go to a couple of the lighthouses. One of the lighthouses, we got there in time for me to do the tour, and man, it was worth it. So we had to climb all the way up. Like, there was no elevator. And it was so cool because we had to climb to the top of the lighthouse. And this was the Highland Lighthouse. And there was a person giving a tour. So we climbed to the top and we got to look out, and it was gorgeous. It was so worth it because you had to pay extra to do the tour. But it turns out that they actually moved the lighthouse back because of erosion. And the whole time, I'm such a nerd because the whole time I was thinking, well, if I time travel in this, when I'm at the top of this lighthouse, I'm going to actually appear and the lighthouse won't be there and I'll just fall to my death. Like, who thinks that when they're in a lighthouse? We also stopped at another lighthouse as the sun was going down, but because the sun goes down on the opposite side, I couldn't get really good pictures. But then right near that lighthouse, there was also what's called these Three Sisters. Now, most of the lighthouses in the park have been moved, and you could see, because the Three Sisters, they've been moved. They're kind of small, and you see pictures of where they were originally located, like on the coast. And here they're surrounded by trees. I'm like, they're not gonna, protect anyone from anything, but they're pretty small, and they're just, it's a cool little stop. The next day on the way to the park, we did stop at a bookstore called Heritage Books. I stopped at another bookstore earlier that day, which I described in another video. And the Heritage Books, I'm just going to show a couple of the pictures because it was so cool, because of the stairs that went down to the basement, the outside of it. The parking was like right off the street, so it was scary backing out because cars were flying by. We parked and we walked all through P-Town. We parked at the very other end and we walked. And it's such a beautiful town. There were so many people, but man, it is so gay there. It's like a gay tourist area. So basically it's where people come from all over to kind of see gay culture, I guess. I did see placards of people complaining that P-Town is ruined from greed and whatnot, because I guess it used to be just for gay people, but now it's like a huge tourist destination, pretty much like Castro is now. I don't know. From when I was there, it was crowded and there were tons of people there, tourists. But man, it was a beautiful town. The house is right up on the water and or cliffs, and it was just, walking around there, it was just stunningly beautiful. It was a great place. Now, they do have a giant monument there, the Pilgrim's Monument. I really did enjoy looking at that, but we didn't go to the top, maybe for another trip. And the next day when we were leaving, that night, we stopped at Duane Rock. And Duane Rock is kind of cool because it's like the largest type of rock in that area, because it was deposited there from glaciers. So the glaciers picked it up, and as it traveled and then melted, it just dropped it there. It was really cool reading the placard about that geology. Oh my gosh, I forgot to show these when I went to the JFK place. So I am going to end this with leaving Cape Cod National Seashore. In the next video, I'm going to talk about the drive from Cape Cod up to Maine, and then from Maine over to Pennsylvania, where my friend lives. I hope this isn't too boring for you, and I'm hoping you're enjoying the photos and the memorabilia that I'm showing. I hope you'll stick around for part 2. But as always, I want to please remind you to be intelligent and watch part 2.